Organized crime has long fascinated and terrified the law-abiding world. Our favorite movies often depict the glamorous lives of gangsters. But is there actually any truth to those stories, or is crime really a very dirty business indeed? Join us as we have a look at the 20 most dangerous mafias around the world. Number 20. Mara Salvatrucha. Mara Salvatrucha is a gang that is most commonly known as MS-13. The gang was originally formed in Los Angeles in the 1980s by Salvadoran immigrants who fled civil conflict within their home country. And over time, they expanded their influence and criminal activities into other countries and are now known to be, most menacingly, one of the most prominent and violent street gangs on a global scale. MS-13 is divided into cliques or cliques, which operate under the more broad umbrella of the gang. Members will often have distinctive tattoos, and the gang's culture is signified by violence, crime, and a rigid code of conduct. MS-13 is involved in all the usual nefarious deeds that these gangs are known for. The gang's use of extreme violence as a means of control and retribution has made it infamous, and there's been a source of concern for law enforcement in the United States and all across Central America, particularly in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Law enforcement have been attempting to make inroads into the gang for decades and have made many arrests and ordered the deportations of gang members. Additionally, community-based programs have aimed to prevent youth involvement in the gangs and provide alternatives to a life of crime that has been implemented in areas that are affected by their presence. However, these are still some of the most scary and dangerous people to walk the streets. Number 19. The 18th Street Gang. The 18th Street Gang is also known as M18 or Cal 18. It's an infamous and super violent street gang with a presence particularly in Central America and the United States. Since it was established in the 1960s, the 18th Street Gang has grown to become one of the largest and most complex criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. And over the decades, it's expanded and branched into a whole load of different cliques and factions that operate in various being particularly affected by its presence. The 18th Street Gang is well known for its involvement in a wide range of criminal activities, and their presence in Central America, especially within El Salvador, has contributed to high levels of violence and crime. This earns them the reputation as one of the most dangerous gangs in the region. It has a vague structure, but does not adhere to any centralized organization, and it's made it more difficult for the police to make a whole lot of progress in combating the gang's activities. Number 18. The Aryan Brotherhood. The Aryan Brotherhood is a white supremacist prison gang and organized crime syndicate that originated within the California state prison system in the 1960s. The gang claims they were initially formed as a means of protection against other racial and ethnic prison groups, but to be honest, that sounds like a whole lot of BS when you take their name into consideration. After all, you probably already heard of these scumbags. The Aryan Brotherhood is known for its extremely racist and violent ideology. Members of the Brotherhood are typically white inmates, and they often use symbols such as the shamrock and swastika to represent their affiliation. The gang is notorious for its strict code of silence, which requires members to kill any fellow inmate who violates it. They operate in a blood-in and blood-out policy, which means that killing is basically required in order to gain entry into the gang, and the same to leave. The Aryan Brotherhood dabbles in a full range of deeply unpleasant activities, both in and out of the prison system. This will include drug trafficking, extortion, violence, and murder. Those are their favorites. The gang is feared for its strong prison presence and its ability to control and influence other inmates within the system. Number 17. The Latin Kings. Although they may sound like a ropey wedding band with a mariachi flavor, the Latin Kings are also known as the Almighty Latin King and Queen Nation. They're actually a highly organized and notorious street gang that began in Chicago in the 1940s. Founded with the aim of promoting Hispanic unity while combating social injustice, the gang then transformed over time into a big old crime unit. What are the chances? The Latin Kings use symbols, which includes a 5-pointed crown and distinctive black and gold color scheme. Members refer to themselves as kings or queens, and the gang has a strict hierarchy with leadership structure that's known for its code of conduct. This includes a commitment to social justice, also involves illegal activities like drug trafficking, extortion, and violence. The Latin Kings have a strong presence in many U.S. cities, particularly in Chicago and other Midwest areas, and have also expanded internationally. But then again, there's also a fine line between social organization and the less salubrious side of life, and sometimes it's just a matter of perspective. Number 16. The Mongols Motorcycle Club. The Mongols Motorcycle Club is an outlaw motorcycle gang with a long history of criminal activities in the United States since they began their nefarious business in California in the 1960s. The Mongols are identified by their logo, which has a Genghis Khan-like figure riding a motorcycle. This emblem is said to be the symbol of their rebellious spirit and defiance of authority. The gang has done all of the usual crime stuff, which includes drug trafficking, robbery, and all of the other violent things as well. The club's structure has a national and regional leadership system, with chapters that operate autonomously but under the more broad Mongols umbrella. They have a big presence in several states across the U.S. and have also expanded into some other countries as well. This includes Australia and all across Europe. Number 15. The Camorra. The Camorra is one of Italy's oldest and most notorious organized crime groups. It's based in the Campania region, particularly Naples and the surrounding areas. With routes that date back to the early 19th century, it's one of Italy's most powerful criminal organizations. And decentralized structure, which is made up of lots of smaller clans that are known as camorrizi. These clans are known to engage in a bunch of different criminal activities, and this includes drug trafficking, extortion, money laundering, illegal waste disposal, and racketeering, all of the mafia favorites. But they also have a significant presence in both legitimate and illegitimate businesses. And this allows them to infiltrate the social and economic fabric of their communities, making their whole existence deeply connected to the people whom they exploit. They're notorious for their ruthless violence. Actions have led to a massive impact on the local population, leading to high levels of crime for the entire region. There have been attempts to combat the Camorra for decades, with Italian law enforcement agencies working to disrupt the organization's activities and bring its members to justice. But given the deep roots of the Camorra and their abilities to exploit and use corruption to maintain their power, there have been varying degrees of success. Some of these operations have resulted in arrests and the dismantling of some clans, but the Camorra remains a powerful criminal entity. Number 14. Jamaican Posse/Yardies. The Yardies are a loose collection of Jamaican-based criminal organizations, not only in Jamaica, but also within the United Kingdom and the United States of America. The term Yardies comes from the nickname for Jamaica, the Yard, and is often used to describe those who are part of these criminal enterprises. The Yardies have had a long and complex history that begins in the 1950s. They're mostly involved in drug trafficking, illegal firearms trade, violence, and organized crime. And their influence is particularly significant in the illegal drug trade, where they're known to be major players in the smuggling of cocaine and marijuana into other countries. This gang is often associated with violent activity, and their operations have led to high levels of crime and violence in areas where they're active. They're known for their territorial disputes and conflicts with rival gangs. In the UK, gangsters who call themselves Yardies have been involved in pretty dangerous and violent activity over the years. They're known for drug-related shootings, and sometimes have been accused of murder for revenge for the most trivial of things. In fact, on one occasion, there was a shooting because of a remark about a guy's hairstyle. Number 13. Ndrangheta. This gang is a highly influential organized crime group that is based in the Calabria region of southern Italy. And despite its name being less well known elsewhere in the world, it's often considered to be the most powerful of Italy's organized crime syndicates and has actually grown to become one of the most formidable and far-reaching criminal organizations across the entire planet. Their origins can be traced back to the 19th century, but they've evolved into a modern and highly sophisticated criminal enterprise. They're built from a tight-knit and secretive clan-based structure, with each clan operating independently under a council of senior leaders known as the Crimean. The hierarchical organization allows them to infiltrate various legitimate businesses, both within Italy and abroad, and they can then engage in all kinds of criming activity, which includes drug trafficking, extortion, money laundering, and illegal waste disposal, of which they're so fond. One of their most successful elements is their ability to remain hidden from public view and the prying eyes of law enforcement. This crime group has been surprisingly resilient, and its members will generally follow a strict code of silence known as omerta. Well, the penalty for not doing so is death, and sometimes not only the individual in question, but also their entire family. So that's some kind of incentive. The mob is a ruthless and violent gang who does not hesitate to murder innocent people in order to protect their own interests, despite how they may be depicted in the movies. These are murderers and thugs after all. Number 12. Ndrangheta. This gang is a highly influential organized crime group that is based in the Calabria region of southern Italy. And despite its name being less well known elsewhere in the world, it's often considered to be the most powerful of Italy's organized crime syndicates and has actually grown to become one of the most formidable and far-reaching criminal organizations across the entire planet. Their origins can be traced back to the 19th century, but they've evolved into a modern and highly sophisticated criminal enterprise. They're built from a tight-knit and secretive clan-based structure, with each clan operating independently under a council of senior leaders known as the Crimean. The hierarchical organization allows them to infiltrate various legitimate businesses, both within Italy and abroad, and they can then engage in all kinds of criming activity, which includes drug trafficking, extortion, money laundering, and illegal waste disposal, of which they're so fond. One of their most successful elements is their ability to remain hidden from public view and the prying eyes of law enforcement. This crime group has been surprisingly resilient, and its members will generally follow a strict code of silence known as omerta. Well, the penalty for not doing so is death, and sometimes not only the individual in question, but also their entire family. So that's some kind of incentive. The mob is a ruthless and violent gang who does not hesitate to murder innocent people in order to protect their own interests, despite how they may be depicted in the movies. These are murderers and thugs after all. Number 11. Russian mob bratva. The term bratva is a blanket term and simplified reference to the Russian mafia, or organized crime in general in Russia, and other countries that have a significant Russian-speaking population. The word itself comes from the Russian word for brotherhood, covering many different groups with their own structures, hierarchies, and stuff. The Russian mafia has a history that dates back to the time of the Soviet Union. However, after the collapse of USSR, it underwent a massive expansion in the mess that followed the ending of the regime and became deeply involved in the whole gamut of criminal activity. These criminal organizations are known for their ruthlessness, and their activities have often led to violent conflicts. The Russian mafia operates not only within Russia, but also on a global scale with an extensive network in countries all over the world. They're known for their adaptability, which has allowed them to infiltrate legitimate businesses and politics. The reach extends well beyond Eastern Europe, with a big influence in Western Europe as well, the United States, and even South America. It's associated with high-level corruption and causing a whole lot of bad stuff all over the place, but it's also well-funded and especially good at exploiting legal and jurisdictional issues, which can make it almost impossible to make any kind of real attempt to dismantle their networks. But then again, I did mention that they're especially good at high-level corruption, so perhaps it's not all that entirely unrelated. Number 10. Gangster Disciples. The Gangster Disciples, or GD, is a notorious street gang that began its business of crime in Chicago, Illinois in the late 1960s. It was begun by a couple of guys named Larry and David, and now has a significant presence in various cities across the United States. It's one of the most prominent and largest street gangs in the entire country. The Gangster Disciples can usually be identified by their symbols. These are a six-pointed star in pitchfork. They've historically been involved in a wide range of criminal activity, all the usual stuff that includes drug trafficking, extortion, money laundering, and violence. And their structure is hierarchical. They often operate in a highly organized manner. The Gangster Disciples have a fairly fruity history, which includes periods of incarceration for their leaders, a whole bunch of internal conflicts and infighting, and legal actions taken by law enforcement to disrupt operations. There's no doubt that this gang's presence has had a negative impact on the communities in which they operate and has led to increased levels of violence and general crime. Now it's time for the fancy topic. What in the world are we looking at here? According to the information that I've been handed, this is some sort of dangerous lesson being taught by the Chinese Mafia. But it looks kind of weird to me. What do you guys think is going on here? Is this the triads doing weird violence, or some sort of trick of the light? Comment down below with the hashtag fancy topic and let me know your opinion in relation to what I just showed you on screen. Number 9. Mungiki. Mungiki is a secretive and extremist group in Kenya with a complex history that combines a whole bunch of political and religious elements. The group emerged in the 1980s and has been involved in various illegal activities, which includes hideous violence, extortion, and varied criminal enterprises. Initially, they were formed as a religious and political movement that advocated for the return to traditional Kikuyu values and customs. It gained momentum in the 1990s as it sought to challenge the dominance of other ethnic groups within Kenya's political landscape. However, the movement evolved over time, turning to violence and criminal activity in order to achieve its goals. Citizens from criminals, including Mungiki. Again, we're looking at something which is much more layered and subjective than a bunch of thugs out cracking heads. They use oaths and rituals to bind members and enforce loyalty, and have been involved in violent clashes, assassinations, and extortion, which is often targeted. The community itself. Number 8. Barrio Aztecas aka Los Aztecas. Barrio Aztecas is a prison gang and a bunch of outside criminals that began its crime career in the United States, but is best known for its significant presence in the border regions between the U.S. and Mexico. It has a history of violence, drug trafficking, and criminal activity, making it a top issue of concern for law enforcement. The gang was founded in the 1980s within the prison system. Prison does seem to be doing some great work. If that work is to be a place in which criminals can successfully organize themselves and then operate illegal and violent activities both inside and outside of the penal system. Barrio Azteca members are primarily of Mexican, American, or Chicano descent. The gang's name, which means Aztec neighborhood in Spanish, is known for its involvement in drug trafficking, extortion, violence, and organized crime. All of that usual crime shiz, to be fair. Its operation will often extend across the border into Juarez, Mexico, where the gang maintains a significant presence. And that's a place where nobody really should choose to be unless they were doing some fairly hefty criminal stuff. Juarez is the second most dangerous city in the world. The most is Tijuana, which is weird that both of these Mexican cities share borders with the United States. Efforts to fight the Barrio Azteca and its criminal activities have necessitated a combination of law enforcement measures on both sides of the border. The gang has been the target of various operations that are aimed at dismantling its networks and apprehending its key members. Number 7. Bridget Rosset. The Red Brigades. The Bridget Rosset, or Red Brigades, is a left-wing extremist group that emerged in Italy during the 1970s. They became notorious for their actions of political violence and terrorism. Ideology was considered especially dangerous during that Cold War era. The Red Brigades were founded with the aim of creating a Marxist revolution in Italy. The group believed that Italy was under the influence of imperialist powers, mainly the United States, and they sought to establish a communist state by any means necessary, which included kidnappings, assassinations, and bombings. All the fun stuff. One of the most notorious incidents was the kidnapping and murder of Aldo Moro, a prominent Italian politician. Moro's body would be found in the trunk of a car in Rome, and that would lead to widespread condemnation of the Red Brigades. The group would be responsible for many other attacks and kidnappings all throughout its existence, and after the public backlash and increased law enforcement efforts against the group, there was a strong decline in their activities through the late 80s and early 90s. Several members were arrested, and the organization would largely disband. Number 6. Medellin Cartel. The Medellin Cartel was one of the most powerful and infamous drug trafficking organizations in the world, originating out of Colombia, and was at its height during the 1970s and 80s. Led by Pablo Escobar, the cartel was responsible for a significant portion of the world's cocaine production and distribution. Escobar was a notorious Colombian drug lord and leader of the cartel, who rose to power and became one of the wealthiest and most powerful criminals in history. Known for his ruthless tactics, he was involved in drug trafficking, violence, and corruption, and his illicit activities had a significant impact on Colombian society, leading to a widespread amount of violence and instability. His reign eventually ended in 1993 when he was killed by Colombian authorities. The cartel's primary activity was the production and distribution of cocaine, which they then smuggled into the United States and other countries through various means, which included shipments of legitimate goods. They played a major role in fueling the cocaine epidemic in the U.S. during the 1980s, but were also making money by meeting a demand, I suppose. The cartel was known for its ruthlessness and willingness to resort to extreme violence in order to protect its own interests, which included assassinations, bombings, and other acts of terror that led to a high number of casualties and an atmosphere of fear and chaos. But that's often the result of these Western addictions in the developing nations that are bearing the brunt of their problems. Number 5. Hell's Angels. The Hell's Angels are one of the most infamous and notorious motorcycle clubs in the world. Deeply entangled in organized crime and feared for their violent activities, the gang would be founded all the way back in 1948 in Fontana, California, and ever since then, the Hell's Angels have grown to become an international outlaw motorcycle gang, having chapters in many parts of the world. The Hell's Angels are instantly recognizable by their Death's Head logo, featuring a skull that's wearing a German military-style helmet. The emblem is a symbol of their outlaw identity, and the gang's activities mostly revolve around criminal enterprise. This includes drug trafficking, extortion, arms smuggling, and violent crimes. They're known for their territorial disputes with rival motorcycle clubs, most notably the Mongols. Given that that's what the club is all about, they do like to ride their bikes a lot. Most will travel tens of thousands of miles every year and will often ride out in formation with the hierarchy of the club indicated by their position on the road. Becoming a member involves a series of requirements. First, you need a specific sort of character. Secondly, you need a Harley Davidson. And thirdly, you need a contact in the club. Finally, if they do happen to like you, then you may become what's known as a hang-around, and then you can progress to being an associate, and then a prospect, and then eventually, after years of it all, you might finally become fully patched. And then, you are finally a Hell's Angel. Number 4. Triad. Triads are secret societies and criminal groups with deep roots in Chinese culture and history. The term refers to the traditional triangular symbol used to represent them. Triads have a strict and hierarchical structure, with a variety of secret rituals, symbols, and a code of conduct that emphasizes loyalty, brotherhood, and secrecy. Members will often bear tattoos and engage in initiation ceremonies, and their main activities include crime, naturally. But specifically drug trafficking, human trafficking, extortion, and money laundering. They have both legitimate and illegitimate businesses that make them difficult for law enforcement agencies to catch. The triads are highly secretive and maintain a code of silence that's similar to the Italian Mafia's omerta, so it's hard for authorities to gather information and prosecute their members. Number 3. Vice Lords. The Vice Lords, also known somewhat pompously as the Almighty Vice Lord Nation, is a street gang that began in Chicago, Illinois in the mid-20th century. The gang has a complex history that involves both social and political elements, and it actually has origins in community self-defense and activism. So some of their story is likely to be unreliable because, propaganda and all that jazz. The Vice Lords began in the 1950s as a community organization that aimed to address social issues that included racial discrimination and economic inequality. However, over time, the group's mission shifted and it evolved into a criminal street gang involved in various illegal activities. This included drug trafficking, extortion, and violence, and they often use gang-related symbols and colors, being black and gold, to identify themselves. In recent years, some factions of the Vice Lords have made a whole bunch of effort to disassociate their criminal past and engage in community-based initiatives, while trying to make amends for the negative impact they had on their communities. But the law enforcement initiatives can be a little tone-deaf to these changes, and there's often a clash of goals. Number 2. The Albanian Mafia. The Albanian Mafia is a criminal organization with a significant influence in various parts of the world, most notably Europe and North America. Their roots can be traced back to the turbulent time following the collapse of communist rule in Albania. During the 1990s, the Mafia has a clan-based insular structure and is composed of interconnected families or clans, each operating independently while controlling specific geographic areas. These clans are involved in a wide range of illegal activities. They are known for their adaptability and ability to infiltrate legitimate businesses and government institutions. This has led to concerns of corruption and criminal influence, and they have a reputation for using extreme violence in order to protect their interests. While settling disputes. Number 1. La Cosa Nostra. La Cosa Nostra translates from Italian to this thing of ours, and is one of the most notorious and influential Italian-American organized crime syndicates in the United States. Also known as the American Mafia, La Cosa Nostra is divided into various families, each led by a boss or a don, who oversees a hierarchy of underlings that include capos, soldiers, and associates. These families operate independently, but often maintain ties through a ruling commission that addresses disputes while maintaining order. The American Mafia has been involved in various illegal activities over the years. They have a long history of infiltrating legitimate businesses and influencing public officials.